To understand the Fibonacci circle, or as I call it, the attractor, you first need to understand what an attractor is and why it is used. So, what is the attractor? The attractor is a measurement tool. And why do we use it? We use it to measure parabolic dynamic liquidity. What is parabolic dynamic liquidity? Dynamic liquidity is liquidity that moves with price in relation to time, stops, limits, trailing orders, and market orders. There are two types of dynamic liquidity: linear, which is essentially trends and channels, and parabolic or accelerative, which is liquidity that generates exponential momentum either through growth or decay. Since price charts represent a naturally chaotic system, and because nature does not develop through perfectly straight lines, the parabolic curve can represent the location of liquidity more accurately. Okay, so now that we understand that this is essentially a sophisticated ruler that measures liquidity in relation to time, several questions arise. How do we use the ruler? How do we measure with it? And what do the values on the ruler actually mean? To understand all of these things, we first need to begin with Fibonacci ratios. Look at this price movement and at the Fibonacci grid measuring it. This is a mistake. Or, not exactly a mistake, but rather a lack of understanding of the relationships because of a human limitation. Fibonacci ratios do not belong to a linear world, where there is 0 and 1, beginning and end, black and white, good and bad, buy and sell. Fibonacci ratios belong to the natural world, which contains cyclical, oscillatory, and parabolic systems. Therefore, they do not measure only from 0 to 1. They measure from 0 to 1 and from 0 to -1, with 0 representing equilibrium. This approach allows us to obtain the precise relationships of every wave that price creates, both its internal relationships and its external ones. So what the instrument does is measure the liquidity of the structure not only through its external data points, but also through its internal ones. This makes the ruler far more precise. Think about it this way. When you mark a channel, you have a certain number of pivot points that allow you to locate the position of that channel. With the attractor, or Fibonacci circle as its official name, there are a much larger number of matching points. Therefore, the precision of the measurement of the price movement becomes much more surgical. So how do we use it? It depends heavily on what you want to measure and from which fractal perspective you are approaching it. Because the information points the attractor is based on are not based on verified points created through TradingView's magnet tool, the larger the attractor you are trying to identify, and the broader the perspective you are using, the more significant the degree of offset in the attractor's accuracy becomes. Matching an attractor can take a long time. Think about it like assembling a 5,000-piece puzzle on a surface that is only large enough for 4,998 pieces. The picture of the puzzle will be more or less clear, but it will never be perfect. Once we understand what we want to measure, we use two elements to fit the attractor. We steal templates from past price movements, and we know how to align the strings of the attractor according to their logic in relation to price movement. For example, if I place the template on new pivot points, the strings, which represent the ratios of the attractor, need to integrate logically into the price movement. That means that if I place the template and the 0.786, the 0.382, or any other ratio does not logically correspond to the behavior and movement of price, then the position of the attractor is wrong. This is already a very high level of understanding. At this point, you need to understand the logical and mathematical element of each ratio and what it represents fractally. Now we are going to explain our ruler. Our ruler is composed of units of frequency, or rate. This rate is based on Fibonacci ratios, which represent a natural system. But there is another rate as well, the linear rate, which is composed of equal intervals. 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and so on. The strings of the linear rate and the strings of the Fibonacci ratios represent, in essence, the conflict between humans and our linear perspective and nature and its fractal complexity. I am creating a lot of noise here, essentially an attractor within an attractor. But that noise is not random. The liquidity represented by the strings of both systems creates, together, an almost perfect understanding of price movement and of the dynamic liquidity surrounding it. Now, let's make this a little more complicated, as if it wasn't complicated enough. We have the linear frequency, and we have the fractal frequency of Fibonacci ratios. With the Fibonacci frequency, we can measure from 1 to 0, where 0 represents the median line, the dashed line. But we can also measure Fibonacci ratios from 1 down to 0, where 0 represents the core, which is 0.236. And this gives us a natural physical system in which the mass has a core where the energy is so strong that price cannot penetrate it. And if price cannot penetrate it, then that core becomes the boundary, the zero. Okay, this is an attractor I built for Bitcoin 6 months ago. To be honest, this is the first time I've looked at it again since price entered the core. I abandoned the setup because, in my understanding, entering the core means there is an error in the positioning of the attractor. But, looking at it now, we can see that even what I considered an error can still produce proportions that correspond to the reaction of the price movement. Look at the highs on the left. The distance between them and the low that created this significant bullish candle is 1.5, exactly the opposing attractor. The space between 0.382 and 0.618 is a channel that can be considered both a very strong magnet and a very strong rejection zone. And look at how it pulled price in, and then rejected it, like a magnet whose polarity changed after contact. When you look at your finished setup and examine the attractor, you need to intuitively feel its rotational flow, whether it flows from right to left or from left to right. If you identify the correct flow, you can understand when that flow breaks before everyone else, assuming that your setup is accurate and the attractor is positioned on the correct pivot points. Finally, I want to clarify something important. It is easy to become confused and think that the strings of the attractor are support and resistance, especially when they demonstrate an insane level of precision in their touches. But you need to understand that precise touches are the creation of liquidity on the same string, not evidence that the string itself is acting as support or resistance. It is a line that accumulates liquidity. Again, assuming your attractor is accurate, the strings of the attractor are essentially points where price tends to oscillate. A precise touch is an oscillation that failed. When price closes above or below a string after leaving a wick behind it, you can interpret that as a liquidity sweep of that price range. Now, this is only the foundation of the Fibonacci circle. To understand how to read it in depth and across multiple dimensions, you need to understand other elements of ATTA, such as fractality, symmetry, and the physical and mathematical concepts based on chaos theory. Once you understand the Lyapunov exponent and the Lorenz attractor, the multilayer dimension of the Mandelbrot set, and how to connect these concepts to patterns and the price action chart, the use of the attractor becomes much more logical and much easier to understand. Although, the deeper you go into it, the more you begin to understand the infinite complexity it creates.